I want to start by saying that I am not someone who looks for attention. I spent 31 years working as a land surveyor in central Pennsylvania, most of it outdoors, most of it alone in terrain that most people never see. I know forests the way other men know their living rooms. I know how deer move through underbrush, how bare leaves sign on saplings, how the ground tells you everything you need to know if you bother to read it. I know the difference between a track left by a healthy animal, moving with purpose, and one left by something injured or desperate. I know what a predator kill looks like versus a vehicle strike. I know the sound a barred owl makes at 3 in the morning and why it stops, and what the stopping means. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand the kind of man I was before that October and the kind of man I became after. The change is not subtle. My wife noticed it before I admitted it to myself. She asked me once, maybe 6 months after everything happened, why I had stopped going outside after dark. I told her it was my knees. She knew it wasn't my knees. She has never pushed me on it, and I have never offered more than she has asked for, and I think we have both decided that is the arrangement that keeps our life functional. Some things you protect the people you love from not because you doubt them, but because you understand that knowledge has a weight and that once you hand it to someone, you cannot take it back. It started with the trail camera, which was my own idea and something I have regretted in quiet moments every single day since. I had been running cameras on our property for about 4 years before the incident. We sit on 42 acres outside a small township in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, backed up against state game lands that stretch for miles without a paved road or a working cell tower. Good deer country. Hardwood ridges with thick laurel understory, 2 creek drainages that hold moisture even in dry years, a lower field that edges into a hollow thick with beech and hemlock. I had 5 cameras positioned along game trails at the time, all of them motion activated, all of them set to timestamp and record short video clips rather than stills. I had learned years earlier that clips told you more than photographs. You could read movement in a clip. You could see how an animal carried itself, whether it was calm or reactive, whether it was alone or looking back at something behind it. That last detail would come to matter more than I ever anticipated. I knew what I expected to capture. Whitetail, primarily. The occasional black bear moving through in early fall before denning season. Coyotes passing through at night, usually in pairs. Turkeys in the early morning hours working the field edges. That was the world I understood, and for 4 years that was exactly the world those cameras showed me. Predictable, seasonal, explicable. The kind of wildlife activity that reminded you that even in the 21st century, land that was left alone still functioned the way it always had. There was comfort in that. I did not fully appreciate the comfort until it was gone. In the first week of October that year, I noticed the deer had changed their patterns. I'd been watching the same trails long enough to understand what normal looked like across every season, every weather pattern, every phase of the hunting calendar. What I was seeing was not a seasonal shift or a response to hunting pressure. The does that typically moved through the lower field edge around dusk had stopped coming entirely. The buck I had been tracking since late August, a mature 8-point with a distinctive drop tine on his left beam that I had named in my head the way hunters do without admitting it, disappeared from my cameras without transition. No gradual reduction in appearances, no shift in timing, just present on the 6th of October and then gone completely. I checked every card from every camera and found nothing from him or from the small group of does he had been shadowing. Not reduced activity. Nothing. The trail through the hollow was what concerned me most. That particular path had shown deer movement on camera almost every single night for 3 consecutive years. Doe groups in September, buck scrapes appearing in October, fawns moving with their mothers through the early summer months. It was as reliable as anything I had ever documented on that property, and starting on the 5th of October, it went completely silent. No deer, no raccoons working the creek edge, no foxes. Even the turkeys that roosted in the white oaks along the upper ridge, birds I had watched move in and out of that area for years, were absent from every morning capture. The hollow, which had always been the most active corridor on the property, had become a place that nothing wanted to be. I told myself there was a logical reason. A storm front was building to the northwest, and animals feel pressure changes in ways we have largely lost the ability to recognize. The rut was still weeks away, but the older bucks were already beginning to feel the hormonal shift and adjust their daylight movement accordingly. Coyotes sometimes pushed deer off established trails when pack activity spiked in early fall. I've spent my life building reasonable explanations for things that made me uneasy, and for most of my life that habit served me well. This was the time it failed me most completely. What I found on the camera positioned at the hollow crossing on October 9th is something I have described in full to exactly 3 people before today. My brother-in-law, who is a practical man and a good one, and who did not believe me, though he had the decency not to say so directly. My family physician, who listened carefully, said very little, and referred me to a colleague who worked with people experiencing acute anxiety and sleep disruption, which I did for almost a year and which helped more than I expected, though not in the way the colleague intended. And my wife, who believed me completely and immediately and without condition, and who has never once asked me to show her the footage, and whom I love more for that restraint than I can adequately express. She understood, without needing to see it herself, that some knowledge does not improve your life by being shared. The camera captured it at 2:47 in the morning. The timestamp is fixed in my memory the way certain numbers embed themselves when they carry enough consequence. The clip was 11 seconds long. In the first 3 seconds, there is nothing but the hollow as I had always known it, the bare October hardwoods, the dark ribbon of the creek bed visible in the lower left corner of the frame, a light scatter of leaves on the ground, still pale from recent rain. Motion activated, so something had triggered it, broken the infrared beam in a way that registered as significant enough to begin recording. In the 4th second, something enters the frame from the right side, not from the trail, from off the trail, through the brush, moving in a direction that cut perpendicular to every natural game path in that section of the hollow. The entry itself was what first separated it from anything I had captured before. Deer enter on the trail. Bear typically follow the path of least resistance along the creek edge. Whatever this was came through the brush sideways to the grain of the terrain, and it came through upright. That is the first thing my brain registered, and I registered it with the part of myself that was still constructing an explanation, still trying to assign the shape a category that made sense. A person, I thought. Someone walking the adjoining game lands in the middle of the night, which happened occasionally with poachers who ran spotlights for deer or checked traps before legal hours. But the proportions were wrong before I could complete the thought. The shoulders were too wide, not in the way a heavy-set man is wide, but structurally, architecturally wrong, the way an animal is built for something specific, and that specificity shows in the skeleton. The arms dropped too low, hanging past where human arms terminate, and they did not swing the way arms swing when a person walks. The head sat differently on the neck, carried forward and low in a way that suggested significant mass concentrated in the skull and jaw. And the height was wrong. I have spent 31 years estimating measurements from reference points. That is my profession. The beech tree in the left portion of the frame I know to be approximately 14 feet tall at the first branch. What crossed through my camera that night, when I placed it against that reference, stood somewhere between 7 and 7.5 feet at the crown of its head. It moved through the remaining seconds of the clip without slowing, without any of the pausing and scent-checking behavior that characterizes deer or bear moving through unfamiliar territory at night. It moved with the deliberateness of something that knew exactly where it was and had been there before. And then, at the 6th second of the clip, while still in motion, it turned its head toward the camera. Not toward the direction it was traveling. Directly toward the camera, which was mounted on a tree at approximately chest height, and which would have been invisible in the darkness to any animal relying primarily on vision. It held that orientation for 2 full seconds, while its body continued moving, the head tracking back over the shoulder as it passed, maintaining that attention on the camera until the angle became too extreme, and then it was gone, past the left edge of the frame, back into the dark. I watched that clip 40 times that first night, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of bourbon I never touched. I watched it until I could see it with my eyes closed, until I had memorized the entry angle and the movement pattern and the exact moment of the head turn. What I kept returning to, what refused to release me, was not the size of the thing, though that was significant and deeply unsettling in its own right. It was not even the shape of it, though the shape was wrong in ways that I still do not have complete language for. It was the quality of the head turn, the unhurried, deliberate, almost casual nature of it, the way you look at something you have already cataloged and already decided is not a threat. There was no startle in it, no animal flinch of the kind you see when a deer catches motion or a bear registers a scent it did not expect. Whatever passed through my hollow at 2:47 on the 9th of October knew the camera was there before it stepped into the frame, had known it was there long enough to have decided what it thought about it, and looked directly into the lens anyway, because it was not concerned about being seen. I pulled all 5 cameras the following morning. I told myself I was done for the season, that the deer had moved on, that there was nothing left to document. I brought the memory cards inside and set them on my desk and did not look at them for 11 days. The avoidance was deliberate, and I understood it as such even at the time. I was not ready to know if there was more. When I finally loaded the remaining cards, 3 of them showed nothing unusual, nothing at all in fact, which was its own kind of information. The 4th camera, positioned on the ridgeline above and to the north of the hollow, told me something I had not been prepared to learn. It had captured the same shape on 4 separate nights, each time between 2 and 4 in the morning, each time moving in the same direction along the ridge, southwest to northeast, following a line that, when I traced it on my laminated property map, ran directly toward the hollow crossing where my other camera sat. Whatever it was had been using that ridge as a corridor with the consistency of habit. The 4 captures spanned 18 days. It was not passing through my property. It was moving through my property on a route it had established, at hours it had chosen, with a regularity that suggested not wandering but pattern. And that pattern had existed, as best I could determine, long before I had a camera positioned to document it. I want to be precise about what the next several weeks felt like, because I think precision matters here more than drama. It was not fear in the way most people use that word. It was not the sharp adrenaline of being startled or the brief dread of a near miss on the highway. It was something slower and more structural, the way a foundation shifts rather than the way a window breaks. I found myself recalibrating things I had taken for granted for decades. The walk from the barn to the back door at dusk, which I had made thousands of times without a second thought, became something I planned. I began noting where the shadows fell along the tree line and which direction the wind was moving before I stepped outside after dark. I started leaving the exterior lights on through the night, which I had never done before, and when my wife asked about the electric bill, I said I was thinking about security in a general sense, and she accepted that, and did not ask again. I checked the door locks before bed with a thoroughness that was new, and that I recognized as new, and that I could not stop doing regardless. What I had not told anyone, what I had not fully admitted to myself in those first weeks, was that I had gone back to the hollow, not to look for it, or at least that is what I told myself at the time. I went back because I needed to understand the camera angle, needed to confirm my measurements against the beech tree reference, needed to establish with my own eyes and my own professional judgment that what I had estimated from the footage was as wrong as I hoped it was. I went on a Saturday morning in late October, full daylight, with my dog, a 7-year-old German shepherd named Cal, who had spent his entire life on that property, and who knew every corner of it as well as I did. We went down to the hollow the way we always had, along the field edge, and then through the gap in the old stone wall my grandfather had built before the land came to us. Cal stopped at the stone wall. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. He did not growl. He did not bark. He simply stopped, sat down on his own, and would not go further. I have seen that dog walk into dense laurel after a wounded deer without hesitation. I have seen him wade into a creek in February without being asked. He's not a timid animal, and he has never in 7 years refused to follow me anywhere on that property. He sat down at the stone wall gap and looked into the hollow, and then looked back at me, and the look he gave me was one I had no framework for at the time. I went into the hollow alone. The beech tree confirmed what I had calculated from the footage. Standing at the camera mount and sighting up to the first branch at 14 feet, the geometry left no room for a different conclusion. Whatever I had filmed was not a man in a costume, and it was not a bear moving upright for a few steps the way bears occasionally do. It was something that stood upright because that was its natural posture, something built for it, and it was built large. I stood in that hollow for perhaps 10 minutes, and then I left, and I did not go back. Not that day, and not in the weeks that followed, and not in the year after that. Cal was waiting exactly where I had left him at the stone wall. He stayed close to my leg the entire walk back to the house, which was also new behavior, and which told me more than I wanted to know about what his senses had registered from the hollow, even at that distance. I spent a portion of that winter doing what I imagine most people in my situation do, which is searching quietly for some version of what I had seen that would allow me to close the file. I looked at bear movement studies and found nothing that matched the sustained bipedal posture or the stride length visible in my footage. I contacted a retired wildlife biologist I had worked alongside on a land assessment project years earlier, a man I trusted and respected, and described the footage to him in general terms without showing it to him, framing it as something a neighbor had captured rather than myself. He listened carefully, and then said something that I have turned over in my mind many times since. He said that if the measurements I was describing were accurate, and if the locomotion was genuinely bipedal and sustained rather than a momentary posture shift, then there was no animal in the established Pennsylvania wildlife record that could account for it. He said it in the tone of a man closing a door rather than opening one, and I understood that he was telling me he did not want to pursue the subject further, and I respected that, and let it go. What I could not let go, and what became the thing that disrupted my sleep more than the footage itself, was the question of duration. Not how long the clip was, but how long the pattern had existed before I captured it. The camera on the ridge had documented 4 passes over 18 days, but the camera had only been in that position since late August. The corridor it was using, the ridgeline running southwest to northeast directly toward the hollow crossing, was a permanent feature of the landscape. It had not changed. The question that kept surfacing in the early morning hours when I could not sleep was a simple one, and I could not answer it, and I still cannot. How many years had something been moving through my property along that path before I had a camera position to see it? 31 years I had walked that land. 31 years I had been in those woods before first light during hunting season, had worked along those creek drainages in all seasons, had walked that ridgeline dozens of times, checking fence line and property corners. I had never seen it. But the absence of a sighting is not the same as absence. I understand that now in a way I did not before October. The following spring I made a decision that my wife supported without asking for a full explanation. We installed a perimeter fence along the back property line where the game lands border our acreage. Good fence, 8 feet. The kind that keeps things out as much as it keeps things in. I told people it was for the garden. Some of them believed me. In August of that year, about 10 months after the footage, I found something along the fence line during a routine walk that I have never shown to anyone and that I disposed of before my wife could see it. A section of the fence fabric had been pulled away from one of the corner posts, not cut, pulled, bent outward from the gameland side in a way that required significant sustained force. The ground on the gameland side of that corner was disturbed, soft earth pushed down in a way that suggested something heavy had stood there, had stood close to the fence, close enough to reach the post. I do not know how long whatever it was stood in that spot before it reached for the fence or what made it stop and withdraw. I repaired the fence that same afternoon, and I added a motion-activated light at that corner that burns from dusk to dawn, and that I check the batteries on every single month without fail. I am 63 years old now, and I have accepted that I will carry this for the rest of my life without resolution. There is no answer coming, no confirmation, and no refutation. What I have instead is a reconfigured understanding of the land I live on, of the woods I spent a career inside, of the assumption that the natural world within walking distance of my back door had been fully accounted for. That assumption was wrong, and being wrong about it changed me in ways that are permanent. I do not regret putting those cameras up. I regret taking them down before I understood what I was looking at. I regret that the footage exists on a hard drive in my desk drawer, and that I have watched it perhaps 200 times, and that watching it has never once made me feel better or brought me closer to an explanation. I regret that I will probably never show it to anyone who could do something useful with it, because the cost of showing it is a conversation I do not know how to have, and consequences I do not know how to predict. What I do not regret is the fence, the lights, and the locks. They may not stop whatever is out there. I am honest enough with myself to admit that. But they are the things I can do, and doing them is the only version of control I have left. If you spend time in forested land, particularly land that borders large tracts of undeveloped wilderness, I am not going to tell you what to think about what I have described. I am not asking you to believe me. I am only asking you to consider that the things we have not documented are not the same as the things that do not exist. I learned that at 2:47 in the morning on October 9th, watching something look directly into my camera from the darkness of a hollow I thought I knew. It knew the camera was there. It looked into it anyway, and whatever conclusion it reached about what it saw, it kept to itself and walked on. And that is the part I think about most. Not what it was, but what it decided.